Hi, I'm Daniel Jones, Senior Editor for Modern Love. I've been editing the Modern Love column for 16 years, since it began in 2004. And for the past few years, I've also worked on the podcast and helped with the first season and now the second season of the Amazon TV series.
And I'm Mia Lee, editor of Modern Love Projects. I also work on all aspects of Modern Love, but I dedicate a lot of my time to selecting and editing tiny love stories. Welcome to this virtual celebration of Modern Love and our new book, Tiny Love Stories, True Tales of Love in 100 Words or Less, which you can find at the New York Times store or wherever you get your books. So Tiny Love Stories began a couple of years ago as a challenge to Times readers. We wanted to know what kind of love story people could tell in 100 words or fewer. And we were very humbled and amazed by the variety and the power of the stories that came in.
Tonight, we'll be sharing 5 tiny love stories performed by 3 extraordinary actors, Marcia Stephanie Blake, Andrew Rannells, and Diane Wiest. Each of them chose the stories they wanted to perform, and they'll also share a bit about why each story spoke to them. 4 of the stories are from the book, and we have the authors here live to talk with us. The 5th story is a brand new tiny love story submitted by a Times subscriber chosen just for tonight. We'll also pair each story with an animated video based on essays from the Modern Love archives that we think has an interesting thematic connection.
Mm-hmm. Before we dive in, we'd like to note that this event is being recorded, and we want to thank you all for being Times subscribers. Your subscription allows us to do long-lasting projects that grow over time, like Modern Love. So we're very grateful for that.
Let's turn to our first story, which comes to us from a writer in Australia. It's read by Marcia Stephanie Blake. Take a look.
Hi, I'm Marcia Stephanie Blake, and this is a tiny love story as written by Caitlin O'Toole called I See It Too. And this story spoke to me from the very first line. And once I read it, you'll see what I mean. The camera can add 10 pounds. It can also take off 10 if you angle it right. Honestly, I wish you were a little thinner, one Craigslist date said. You're attractive, but I'm not attracted to you, said another. I felt like giving up. I could resign myself to the company of dogs, getting a new one every 13 years or so until I... Unwilling to finish that thought, I looked directly into the lens and ventured online one last time. She saw beauty. I see it too. And this is Caitlin and Hazel on the day they were engaged.
Hello. So now we're joined by Caitlin O'Toole and her wife, Hazel Payne. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
So at the end of her reading, Marcia Stephanie Blake held up that lovely photo of you two the day you were engaged. Hazel, could you quickly bring us up to speed from where the tiny love story left off, your meeting online, to the present, your marriage?
Yeah, I made the first trip to see Caitlin in America a couple of months after we started talking online, and we had a fantastic time, and we just were completely in love. And then from that point, for the next couple of years, we went back and forth seeing each other. I have children here, so Caitlin did the majority of the travelling, and she'd spend as long as she could here on each visit. And then Caitlin decided that she, was happy to make the move over here. We wanted to be together, and that was the way that we could see how it could work. So we planned our wedding. We got married in New York City last year, and she now lives here, and we're all, living together as a family, which is perfect.
Amazing. So Caitlin, you were living in New York when you guys first met?
I was living in New York City, in Chelsea.
And then where in Australia do you guys live now?
We are right outside of Adelaide, South Australia, in a town called Maslin Beach.
Beautiful. And then Caitlin, I kind of want to go back to your story. You wrote that Hazel saw beauty and then you saw it too. May I ask you when and how you began to see that beauty in yourself?
Yeah. So I had spent a while misrepresenting myself with filters and crazy camera angles, and gone on dates where I felt like I had misrepresented myself. And this was really the first time where I showed my true self head on, and Hazel said she loved me. And that was beautiful. And I think from that moment on, when we sort of embraced at JFK, I felt like I love myself more.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I also just want to say I love the bravery. And it's also very timely now too, of you looking straight in the camera, bearing your soul. Thank you guys so much. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to show you an animated modern love essay that Dan and I think pairs well with Caitlin and Hazel's story. It also shows how relationships can help you see or appreciate things about yourself that you couldn't or wouldn't before. So take a look.
Three and a half years ago, while my fiancée Sarah and I were making love, I had a heart attack.
911, what's your emergency?
I was 48 and Sarah was 26 at the time, so there was a 22-year difference.
When I met Tim, I had no idea how old he was. It never seemed like it should even matter.
We had been pretty blithe about the whole age difference thing, but this was something that spoke directly to the fact that we're in completely different circumstances in a lot of ways, and that's going to be true the rest of our lives together.
I come from parents who have a big age difference, and my mom wanted me to be warned that in 20 years, it's not going to be the same. I understand that that is her reality, but it's not mine yet. And if in 20 years, he's still my best friend, that's what matters.
The EMTs were working on me, and I looked over, and Sarah was packing an over-the-shoulder kind of overnight bag.
Sweater and clean clothes and his running shoes.
Just something for my stay in the hospital. And the fact that she was so sure that I was coming back, that really meant a lot to me. It made me realize that even if my life didn't have significance for me, it had significance for her.
Yes, this is my fear that something like this could happen again, but that's everybody's fear, I think, if they're in a committed relationship. And I don't think it really matters what you're going to do without the other person. It matters what you're going to do with that person while you're together.
Sarah and I got married 6 months after I had my heart attack. I had spent pretty much my whole adult life doing what I wanted, how I wanted, when I wanted, and I smoked 2 packs a day for about 30 years. In a lot of ways, meeting Sarah was the beginning of my life. Sometimes what love can do is save you from yourself.
Our second tiny love story is He Tried So Hard to Remember Me by Drew Hassan, performed by Andrew Reynolds.
When my 61-year-old father learned he had Alzheimer's, we went to CVS together and bought the largest stack of note cards they sold. I asked, "What's the town where you grew up?" We wrote Union Springs, Alabama. I asked, "Who was your first kiss?" Amanda. 4 years later, preparing to move my father into memory care, I packed up his desk. Taking the note cards felt silly, so I wrapped them in a long forgotten stack in a rubber band and opened his drawer to toss them away. Inside, I found more note cards. They all said the same thing: my name. I had a grandmother, Josephine, who also had Alzheimer's, and I was just so struck by this particular story because it reminded me a lot of my experience with her, and also just the amount of love and unfortunately sadness that comes through in this story. But I was incredibly moved by it.
And we have Drew with us here tonight. Hi, Drew.
Hey, what's going on?
I have to tell you, your story absolutely destroys me every time I read it, which is probably about 25 times by now, and now just again from Andrew reading it. When you saw the cards with your name on them in the drawer, how did that make you feel?
Gosh, I wish my vocabulary was maybe more nuanced, but sad. Just devastated. I guess there's some joy in there too, but I just, you kind of just get used to it, right? You can kind of acculturate to anything. And I think that was one moment. It'd been 4 years, but it just felt so stark and so heartbreaking. Yeah.
What did it make you feel about him? Did you feel like you'd sort of lost him at that point?
Yes. Yeah, I think the thing about Alzheimer's that I have unfortunately learned is that there's never, at least I have not found one moment in time where you realize you kind of lose someone, because it is this really slow deterioration. But I think maybe for me, that was the moment I lost my dad. Yeah.
When you felt like he couldn't remember your name.
Yeah, it was, but also just the tenacity with which he tried to is so loving.
What did you do with the note cards?
I still have them. So yeah, I have this huge stack. They're still wrapped up in this same rubber band. And whenever I move, I just take them with me, and they're always in the closet or on my desk, but I can't get rid of them, but I still have them.
And I want to ask you just briefly, what was the process like of getting these cards and then having these conversations with him, where I imagine like you probably didn't know who his first kiss was, before you asked, or like of jogging his memory. Did you learn things about him that you didn't know before?
Yeah, I learned so much. I think in my family, people have always said that we were so similar. And I think I saw that in temperament, but when I heard more about his youth, or when I took time out of my life to understand who my father used to be, I'm just so thankful that we had that opportunity to get closer while he was still, kind of ticking.
A nice memory.
Yeah.
And finally, you put this story out into the world for thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to read. What was the response to your story?
Yeah, so this is actually my favorite part. So I had just started a new job that I was not particularly thrilled with. And I was in my cubicle, of which I was not particularly thrilled with. And I remember I posted this on Facebook, and I was really excited because a lot of people just came out of the woodwork, and, it feels so isolating, this type of experience, but, so many people were posting and like supporting me, and it felt amazing. But actually the moment that really got me was you have like kind of one notification to go check for people that you're not connected with if they send you a message. And I'd been neglecting that all day. Maybe like a few, like 3 or 4 strangers had sent me a message. But at some point, I think after lunch, I clicked on that and I opened up the inbox and I had like 500, 600.
Oh my God, really?
I can't even remember messages from people. Yeah, from all across everywhere. And I completely lost it. And I started hysterically crying. And I went to the bathroom and I just sat there for like 30 minutes and I missed a meeting, but it doesn't matter.
Drew, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
Great stories. And now here in animation is a slightly different perspective on how Alzheimer's and love can interact. Check it out.
My grandmother was calling from her assisted living home. Whenever she wanted to talk about something really important, she would always say, "Have you got a minute?" She went on to say that my aunt was seeing someone. My aunt just had a double hip replacement. She needed help to do everything, let alone date. She said he's been in love with her since kindergarten, and he's just been waiting for my uncle to get out of the picture. My uncle had committed suicide only about 3 months prior to this call. My grandmother had Alzheimer's for 7 years or so. We would leave a restaurant and she would be like, "Have we eaten yet?" The fact that at this point in her disease, she remembered that my uncle was no longer living was pretty remarkable. He had a name, and his name was Nick Stephanopoulos. He was a wealthy businessman. He was going to take my aunt to Rome, and he was going to buy her all these beautiful gifts. In the beginning, we were like, "I think you've been watching too much television." My grandmother got really upset. It was almost more trouble to deny her this thing. And we were by no means making fun of her, but we kind of talked about him like he was a family member. We just started playing along. My aunt went to visit her in the assisted living home. She was lying in her bed and had this really grave look on her face. And she said Nick was on his way to New Orleans on the train, and he bumped into Mr. McDaniel, the train conductor. And Mr. McDaniel thinks that you should know that Nick is involved in some unscrupulous business deals. My aunt said, "Oh my gosh, I will bring that up with him." Nick actually lived for about 2.5 years. And my grandmother, her health declined. And then one day, my grandmother said, "I'm sorry to hear about Nick. I heard he only has 3 months to live." She knew that she was dying and she had to kill him off before she left the world. Having Nick was sort of this perfect way to preserve her imagination and her personality.
Such a good animation and story. Our next tiny love story takes us across the globe in 100 words. Here is India is an Ache, written by Kanika Punwani Sharma, read by Diane Wiest.
Landing in Mumbai feels like releasing a breath I didn't know I had been holding. My husband remembers India as dirt, poverty, noise. I remember the aroma of masala fried pomfret, the generosity of gruff cabbies saying, "No, madam, you keep the change." Day-long cries of crows, hawkers, doorbells. In America, I play music to fill silences. For me, India is no longer a country, it's and ache. I left the place I love for the man I love. It's not a complaint. I'm only saying that sometimes the most unconditional of loves are also the most inconvenient. I feel a sadness for her, and it makes me wonder about a number of things. What is she? I know she says she's not complaining, and that her love for her husband is unconditional, but she says it's just a, what does she say? I forgot the word. It's just an inconvenience. And I feel that she uses that word to cover up what really is a very deep sadness. She now perhaps doesn't belong anywhere, not in India and not in America. And so it makes you question, what is real in love? What is real? Or is that even the question? I don't know.
Hi, Kanika.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I am going to take up where Diane left off with this idea of love being unconditional and inconvenient. And the question is, which love is unconditional and inconvenient? Is it the love of your husband or the love of India? Or I suppose it could be both.
You know, Dan, that's an interesting question. I think my idea of it kind of changed as I wrote the piece as well. So where the piece kind of started out was with like very small, banal thing. And I think, you know, nobody tells you when you get married, weddings are like these grand gestures of love, but a lot of marriage is actually made up of very tiny moments, like tiny joys and also a lot of tiny irritations.
Yeah.
You know, whose turn is it to like take out the trash, or whose turn is it to unload the dishwasher? And I think at one of these times it was my turn to unload the dishwasher. It had been kind of foisted on me by my husband. And I didn't want to do it. I was really annoyed. And that night I went to bed and I didn't do it. And I left him this little post-it on the dishwasher saying, hey, I've not done it and I'll do it tomorrow morning. And I know this is going to annoy you. And I'm also annoyed, but let's remember that we promised to love each other unconditionally. And then I had this little thought in parentheses I put, hey, do you think that people say unconditional love as a euphemism for inconvenient love? And then, you know, the next morning I thought about that and I was kind of pleased with myself for having come up with that. And I started writing this piece where I wanted to kind of, you know, write a little bit more about that. And I think what happened, which happens often when you have an idea that resonates with you and you kind of write your way into it, you find out it's about a lot more than what you first thought on the surface level.
Right.
So really what kind of started off as the story about irritation over, you know, the small tasks in married life ended up kind of being an ode to this country. And I think like with Drew, when it came out in the New York Times, I had a bunch of people reach out to me who were strangers to me to say that, hey, you know, I'm in this situation as well. I came to this country for someone I love, and I completely get what you're saying. And this piece really, I really connect with this piece. But there were also other people who, you know, from the comments, you could tell that the love that they saw as unconditional and inconvenient was the love of country, not the love of the person. And at that point, I thought, well, that's interesting too. And I kind of thought about it, and I felt that, yeah, you know, maybe subconsciously there was that thought there as well, because I feel that the love for India is also very, in ways, inconvenient, because for most immigrants, I think that kind of love, the love of country, it's a difficult love. It's a challenging love, you know. So having thought about it more, I think, yeah, it's definitely both loves.
That's interesting because I read it as country first, and then sort of came around to it. But one thing I really love about these tiny love stories, and I say this to Mia all the time because she chooses them and then presents them to me, and we sort of work together to decide what to publish and work on. But there's so much left out. Like there's so much left out when you have 100 words, and these are such big stories. So like the questions I ask her often, because she has the conversations, are questions that I can now ask you, which is like, how did you meet your husband, and why did that necessarily become a marriage that then had to come to America?
So the way I met my husband, we met at a dinner in Bombay. We were sitting, we happened to be sitting side by side. But it was interesting because it was at a point where both of us had done our undergrad in the US. Mm-hmm. And then we'd come back to India for various reasons. For me, it was because I graduated in December 2008, which was a very challenging time to find a job in the US. So I'd come back home. And he'd come back for different reasons. So we had that connection point. But, you know, for me, when I first came to the US, I came completely convinced that I was going to settle in this country. I wanted to settle in the United States. And then when I left and went back home, I was kind of disappointed that that had happened. But something really surprising happened at that point, I think because it had the distance and the perspective, and I came back to India as a young adult, I began to, I think, discover it anew. Mm. And in discovering it, I began to kind of fall in love with it. And then I met this guy and I started to fall in love with him as well. But he was pretty clear right from the start that he was pretty committed to going back to the US. So I think, you know, right from the get-go, I knew at some point a decision was going to have to be made.
Yeah. And one last question. When do you, at what moments do you feel that ache? What triggers it most?
I think, you know, there's the obvious moments as well, which are moments of celebration or moments of challenges, not just mine, but also like with my family and my friends who are in India when I can't be there for them or they can't be there for me, you know, things like weddings, birthdays, but even things like illnesses. But then there are other times when I think it just hits you at very surprising moments. You know, sometimes I'll hear someone speaking Hindi at like a crosswalk or in the grocery store, or like you smell a familiar fragrance in the air, or you like bite into something and it tastes like home. I usually go back home at this time of year during the end of year holidays. And obviously this year that isn't possible. I think by the time I go back next, it would have been almost 2 years since I've been back home. So I would say this month's been particularly hard, and yeah, that ache's been there.
Thank you, Kanika, so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Dan.
We are pairing with This Tiny Love Story, an animated story that's also about unexpected hurdles in long-time love. Take a look.
I am an English teacher, and across the board, there's not a very great grasp of grammar, in particular syntax, sentence structure, and that drives me nuts. It's just something that you need to learn and get it right. As a writer myself, I just think that people will judge you based on the way that you put your words together. James and I met at a wedding in Hawaii. He was wearing an aloha shirt and he danced kind of crazy and flung me around a lot, and I thought, this guy's kind of fun. Then we went and sat on a bench and looked over the ocean, and he said that he really liked me and wanted to talk to me and be with me, and I thought that was so surprising for someone to do so quickly. The men I dated in New York didn't tend to share their feelings that way. After the wedding, James went back to North Carolina. I went back to New York City. I totally thought it was just going to be a one-night fling. I did not think that I was ever going to see him again, but he kept in touch by sending me lots of emails.
Tonight, I cannot sleep, so I will play songs to you. For Jesse, about Jesse, my inspiration. I thinking of you and nobody else. I haven't eyes for anyone else but you.
I couldn't help but notice all of the spelling errors and grammatical errors in them, and I didn't know if that meant that he wasn't the right guy for me. I was definitely fighting off my editor instincts. I had to tell myself that it wasn't that important the way that he wrote things. It was more important what he said. He just wanted to share things with me, and I would write little things that had wordplay in them, little puns. I think I was trying to still play the game a little bit, but none of that really resonated with him. The only thing that worked was sharing emotion, and that was a new thing for me.
I'm sorry, I love that animation so much. Our fourth story has a journey that really stood out to me. It's called My Polygamist Ancestor and Me, and it's written by Sean Bitters. Let's go back to Andrew Rannells.
My middle name is Traugott, after my only polygamist ancestor. At 36, I came out as gay, divorced my wife, and left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. At 37, I began dating a man. At 42, we married. A year later, we entered the stormy landscape of polyamory. We have each other, our children, and boyfriends. I never thought I would have anything more in common with Traugott than an odd name. Now I wonder, could he and his 2 wives have given me relevant advice, a map for my new love life? Oh, sweet Jesus, the irony. While I am not Mormon and have never been, I played one on Broadway and learned a lot about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And this story, I don't know. I love how he connected the relevant advice piece of it to something that he was, perhaps a bit ashamed of at a different time in his life. And I just loved that the sort of understanding and growth that is experienced, and compassion for something that maybe he thought he didn't necessarily understand at one point, but now he realizes actually, he realizes the human that is behind that name.
Hi, Sean. We have Sean Traugott Bitters here. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So here's an easy question for you. Have you seen the Book of Mormon?
Yes, I have.
Uh-huh. And what did you think about it?
The Book of Mormon, one of the annoying things is when you see, like, Mormons are kind of, they get featured in the news a lot, and people always kind of get the story wrong. Like, as a Mormon, you're like, no, you didn't get that right. The Book of Mormon got things so right. It was satirical and it was piercing, but at the same time, it was just funny because it was true. And it was also touching because it was kind of honored it all at the same time. So I just sat there and I just cried and laughed. And I don't think anyone around me understood why, because I'm like, you're not Mormon, you don't know if you really get it. So.
Not brought to tears. And then I was wondering what you know about your polygamist Mormon ancestor. Do you know anything besides the name?
Yes. So one of the perks, I guess, of being raised Mormon, having Mormon families, they do their genealogy. It's something that a lot of them take very seriously. I actually have a big book that is kind of recorded stories and genealogical records of all of my father's ancestry. So yeah, I actually know quite a bit about him. I've been kind of obsessed with him for like almost my whole life. So,
Any facts? Fun facts?
He was little. He was short like me. The things I've read seems that he was a very kind of feisty, passionate type of person, which I kind of relate to. I was able to find the ship that he took to the US, and I actually found a painting of it, which is really weird. And I actually got a tattoo of the painting because the ship actually burned, the sailors burned it down like years after he took it. So I just thought it was a really interesting story. So anyway.
Epic, yeah. And then how did you and your husband meet, and how long have you been together?
We've been together for almost 9 years. We've been married for about 2.5. And we met online. We met in person for the first time in a yoga class. He is a yoga instructor, and it wasn't his class, but that's where we met. And he was kind of shy, and I thought, well, he's not really into me because he wasn't really making eye contact, but he's just, I know now as a kind of a shy person. And we talked afterwards and agreed to go get lunch, and it was just like, it was immediate. So
wonderful. And could you tell me briefly about how your polyamorous marriage works? Like, are there certain agreements or certain rules?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's kind of up in the air because of COVID, because the chance to date or be with other people is limited, and the rules have changed over time. At first, we were just kind of open, so we could hook up with other people, and that was kind of it. And then it kind of slowly transitioned into polyamory, and so he's had a boyfriend, I had a boyfriend. We don't really have those boyfriends anymore, and some of the rules are simply we try to keep each other in the loop about what's happening. We have rules about who stays the night and whether they can or not. When we have the kids from my previous marriage, then obviously there's no one here at the same time. So we kind of just play them by ear and try to honor them. And then as things, as we grow and change and different needs become obvious, then we kind of either bring the boundaries in or let the boundaries kind of go out a little bit.
Awesome, organic. And then because you write this in your piece, I'm curious what kind of advice you would want to ask of your polygamous ancestor about polyamory. Like, there are certain challenges that you would just love to, talk to him or his wives about.
Yeah, I feel like, well, anytime I meet someone who's in a polyamorous relationship, and I find the same thing when they meet me. The question is, what are your rules? How do you navigate this? And I find that I would actually really like to talk to his wives, Rosina and Bertha Ann, because I come from the second wife, and from the little I've kind of gathered, they didn't really have much of a relationship, or they didn't really want one with each other, at least from what I can tell. And so I really like to talk to them and say, how do you deal with jealousy? Yeah. How do you feel when he's spending the night with the other wife? Do you want a relationship? How have you tried to reach out and try to establish some type of relationship with your wife? And I like to ask them, they didn't have this chance, I don't think. I don't know. Would you like to have a second husband? Because we have that freedom. They didn't necessarily, at least not sanctioned. So I like to talk to them about how they navigate that. How do they share time with the parenting? I can't imagine sharing, none of our boyfriends have had children, so I can't imagine the idea of doing that type of navigation.
That makes total sense. What do you think the biggest reward? You spoke a little bit about the challenges of having to negotiate boundaries or just be very, communicate clearly. What do you think the biggest rewards of the polyamorous marriage is for you?
You get to kind of push at the boundaries of what you think a relationship is. And I think there's a lot of thoughts and a lot of fears that come with a relationship. And at times you push against them and you realize what your fears are, which I know doesn't sound positive, but once you understand what your fears are, you start to understand what's underneath those fears. And then you go wait, is this reasonable? Is this logical? Why do I feel this way? And so you start learning a lot about yourself. And then you learn I can watch my husband meet someone and kind of see that thrill and that the joy they have in meeting that person. And that's kind of delightful. And oh wait, that doesn't mean I'm canceled.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, obviously things can happen and you break up all the time, but you kind of see that expansion, and then have new experiences. You're on your own. I was a Mormon for 36 years. I didn't get to hook up and date people and do all that type of things as a gay man. And so this allows me to kind of have some of those experiences that I never got to have previously. But we're taking the journey together.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. I really appreciate talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much for this experience. This is amazing. Thank you.
Okay. In this next animation, we have another journey of self-discovery and religion to share with you. Enjoy.
There is a really popular Christian educational supply store called Mardell's, and they sell these purity rings. You abstain from sexual activity until you're married. A lot of the girls I knew were doing this, and so I decided that I should do it too. I never thought, oh, I might regret this. I remember sitting in the youth group chapel of my church. Everyone was singing worship songs. They were closing their eyes and they were lifting their hands. In that moment, I knew I didn't believe the way that they did. When I was a kid, I loved making cheese sandwiches. I made them every day. And then one day I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. I've eaten too many. I think that's almost my taste for religion. It's a food that you don't want to eat anymore. I made the decision that I wasn't going to wait. The guy who would be my first, I didn't want him to be like some random guy, but I didn't want my first time to be with someone I loved. I was looking for someone who wasn't too intimidating. So I was going out with a group of girlfriends. I was introduced to this guy, Zach. He was tall and kind of awkward. We just started talking. He wanted a vacuum for his 23rd birthday, and I thought that made him so different. It made him responsible and sexy. And at the end of the night, I grabbed his phone and put my number in, and I was like, text me. Yes, this guy is nice. I feel a little superior to him because I thought I was a little too pretty for him, which I'm ashamed to admit. He seemed like a good candidate. One thing led to another. Then it happened. Afterward, I wanted to sleep in my own bed. I wanted to go home. 3 o'clock in the morning, I rolled down the windows and turned up the radio. I'd done what I wanted to do, and now I could do anything. And then our communication was pretty much just, a random text that went unanswered. I asked him if he ever got that vacuum for his birthday, and he never replied. But it was really clear that he just wasn't interested in seeing me at all. For a while after, I felt like he was kind of a dog. Wow, he just used me like that. He knew it was my first time. But then I realized that I, in a sense, really targeted him. I used him as a way to free myself.
And our last Tiny Love story tonight is a new one submitted by a Time subscriber who may be in the audience. We love the way this story transforms a home into a fantasy land, especially at a moment when we're all spending way too much time at home. Marcia Stephanie Blake performs this story for us. It's written by Jenny Gaborno, and it's untitled.
This tiny love story spoke to me because this is how I feel about my children every day. I'm a laundry fairy, stealing into their room at night to distribute pajamas and pants. I fold clothes in darkness and search out socks hiding in the lingerie bag like lobsters lurking in a trap. The ocean plays from the sound machine, waves upon waves that never stop. The twins are flotsam in their cribs, pressed up against the sides, chubby legs sticking through the slats. When they were new, they were hot, wet sand, sleeping on my belly. I watch them sleep now like someone who doesn't belong. I watch and marvel that they are mine.
What a gorgeous reading. It's kind of unreal what actors can do. So many thanks to Marcia, Stephanie, and Andrew and Diane. Our last animation tonight also focuses on parenthood and the home, and it feels very fitting for this time of year. It's animated by our longtime Modern Love illustrator, Brian Ray. Enjoy.
My husband Ian is the type of guy who's not afraid to take a big swing. When he proposed to me, he did it on a horse at sunset, dressed as a knight in rented armor. So I guess that set the tone. We live in the house that I've lived in for a long time in California. It's in Marina del Rey by the beach. And a few years ago for the holidays, Ian decided I might enjoy a snow machine inside the house.
I had a crystal clear vision. We were just going to be laughing and dancing in the circle in our house while snow was going to be falling around us.
Before I knew it, this sudsy, foamy stuff started bubbling out and landing on the walls and clumps and on the chair and in my hair and on the floor and carpet. And did I mention the chair was leather?
The moment that I knew it wasn't going to be, received with the love that it was intended was when she screamed.
At this time in our life, when Ian came up with this snow machine, we'd been having a hard go of it because we'd been trying to have a baby. And anyone who's been trying to have a child for 3 to 5 years, it really tests your marriage. And we had passed most of those tests. We felt like such a team. For some reason, this moment, we felt so much not like a team.
It was a time in life when we would have done anything for control. We had no control over this thing that's supposed to be so natural and so easy. So I can see how things that seem sort of chaotic and funny to me could have been really, really frustrating when she's really trying to control things.
So now we have a little girl, a 2.5-year-old. And I do have a fear that she would enjoy snow inside our house. Yeah, she probably would think that's hilarious and fun. But it doesn't mean it couldn't be outside, Ian.
With that, we've come to the end of our time together tonight. Thank you so much for joining us to celebrate these tiny love stories. If you'd like to read more, you can find the book at the New York Times store or anywhere books are sold.
And of course, you can find Tiny Love Stories and other Modern Love essays in the New York Times and on our Modern Love podcast, which comes out every Wednesday. I'm also excited to tell you that we just wrapped shooting season 2 of Modern Love TV on Amazon. I'm afraid I can't tell you anything about it, except that doing it during the pandemic was really, really hard. But I promise that there will be new episodes to look forward to seeing in 2021. We wish you the very best for the holiday season and a happy and healthy new year. Thank you so much for joining us.
Stay safe, be well. Thank you.
Bye.